Hello, Aquano here, back for another video on the Dragon Quest III HD-2D remake. Today, we're talking class changing. What is the best path? First of all, let's start with some general advice for every class. Now, when you decide which class to change into, you need to keep a balance between wanting to have many different skills and making the most use of your stats. For example, if you have a character with very high wisdom, maybe Sage is a better choice than Martial Artist. That can be affected by your personalities or the stat he was at the beginning. Now, you need to have a goal in mind, a final class you want in your final comp. There are classes that are better as stepping stones, not really final classes. And there are classes that can be both. There are classes that can be both stepping stones and can be used in a final comp. And then there are classes that are way better later in the game. They get to shine a lot at high level, or later in the game when you have unlocked more things. So in this video, I'll be going over them in this order. The early game classes, the stepping stone, then the flexible classes, and then the late game classes. So, let's get right into it. Let's start with our trustworthy healer, the Priest. This class is the class that almost everyone starts with, and rightly so. This class gets a res very early, and has all sorts of ailment cleansing. Now, it is a spellcasting class, so the obvious choice would be Sage. And Sage is definitely a good choice. Now, let me give you other options. With Priest, you have three choices. The first choice is to transform your Priest right away into a Sage. This will be very, very good. You can just do that right away if you don't want to make a choice. But you have other options. You can make a tanky healer by making your Priest a warrior to develop his HP. Then you just have a healing warrior. Basically a warrior that's there to tank hits and heal your party members. Your other choice is to make a fast healer. A Priest that becomes a thief. The thief has a crazy high agility stats that makes it so your healer will heal before the enemy finishes off your low HP party members. A fast healer can be very useful, just as useful as a tanky healer. Now, these two options are viable as final choices, or after you reach level 20 with these secondary classes, you can go to Sage and then finish the game with a fast Sage or a tanky Sage. But you can also just stay a thief or a warrior if you want to really commit to the fast or tanky healer. Now, when should you transition your Priest? Very simple answer, at level 23. At level 23, your Priest will learn a spell that will give him higher odds of reviving than with Zin, a spell called Zing. So yeah, wait 3 levels after the required level to class change. Wait the 3 levels, it's gonna be worth it. Then transition to your chosen class. Now, let's get to the next class. Now, let's talk about the Merchant. Some of you guys might not have started the Merchant, but if you did, well, you should know that the Merchant is the fastest class to level. It requires the least amount of XP, so that makes it a really good stepping stone class. Now, you want the Merchant for 2 things, and 2 things only. His ability to farm money, and his useful skill called Service Call. Now, he also gets a skill called Stone Throw, which can be useful to kill metal slimes, but you mostly want him for Service Call and money. So pick him in the early game, and if you did, that's good. Farm money with him, and as soon as he's level 20, just transition. Because he doesn't get anything useful after level 20, so just transition right away at level 20. Now, what should you transition into? Well, you have multiple choices. Since the Merchant so far has been your utility party member, you can keep him in that role, and transition to Thief if you didn't already have a Thief. Now, if you do have a Thief, like you started with Thief and Merchant in your class, then you have 2 choices. Either you make him a Gadabout to then have a free Sage, or you just make him your Sage right away if you don't have a Priest to make Sage. Now, the reason why we recommend going Gadabout then Sage is because your Priest is probably going to be the one using the item to become Sage. And so if you want another Sage, you will have to go the route about the Gadabout way. Now, if you don't want to go the Gadabout way, because that's kind of an annoying class to play, you can play Thief, like we said, or you can become Warrior. Warrior to make your merchant tankier, and then later in the game, become Monster Wrangler. So if you go Thief, you can stay Thief or become Monster Wrangler, and then if you go Warrior, you can stay Warrior or become Monster Wrangler. Monster Wrangler is a good transition class because it's very, very strong in the late game. So you have many choices with the merchant, since it's a class that has like kind of like average, below average stats and everything. So you can make him kind of anything you want. A spellcaster, make him Sage. If you want him to be tanky, make him Warrior. If you want him to still be your utility party member, make him Thief, and then transition into a Monster Wrangler in the late game if you don't already have one. Now, let's get to the next class. Let's talk about the class that is made for you to transition away from, the Gadabout. Now, the Gadabout, I won't use too much of my time on this. Very easy. At level 20, become a Sage. It's free. It's the only way to get a Sage for free. Now, there isn't any useful skill you get right after level 20, so just become a Sage as soon as you can. There is one skill that is useful at level 45, which enhances your magic power. But honestly, it's not worth it to stay Gadabout until level 45, so unless you really want to grind. So just transition to Sage right away. Now, when you become Sage, you have the choice to becoming Thief after Sage to becoming a fast Sage. But if you don't want to complicate things, just stay as a Sage and stick with it and destroy the game. That's it for the Gadabout. Let's go next. Now, let's talk about the last stepping stone class, well, the last only stepping stone class, the Mage. Now, the Mage has kind of been, not nerfed, but become kind of obsolete in this remake, because a lot of other classes have access to AoE hits and even elemental abilities. So, I definitely think it's one of the worst choices in terms of early game DPS, but if you did start with the Mage, it's not a bad choice. It can do the work. Now, you should never transition into a Mage. Well, you can if you want, but it's not considered a really good choice. You should always start with a Mage and then transition into something else. Now, if you did start with a Mage, you have two options. The first option, and very obvious choice, is a Sage. If you want to make him your first Sage, the one that uses the first item you get to become Sage, then do so. You can make him your magical damage dealer. You also have another option. You can make a tanky Mage. That is like a very popular strat that a lot of people do. Just make him like a Warrior. You become a Warrior for Mage, and then just become a tanky spellcaster. So you have two choices, Sage or Warrior. Now, transitioning is level 20 or 21. There is a useful skill here at level 21, but it's not like that necessary. Well, it is if you're becoming Warrior, because the Sage also learns it. So if you're going Sage, then just transition right away. But if you're going Warrior, then wait until level 21 to transition to Warrior. That's it for the Mage. Let's go next. Now, let's talk about our first kind of like hybrid class, which is a class that you can use as a stepping stone or as a final destination, and that's the Thief. Now, it might come as weird for some people because we always thought that Thief was like a utility class and you shouldn't bring it to the late game. Now, that is true if you're only a Thief from the beginning to the end. You should not do that. That is not recommended. But if you use other classes to get a lot of skills and then a lot of like firepower, and then you use the Thief as a final destination to become a fast DPS, like Gadabout to Sage to Thief, or Priest to Sage to Thief, is a viable strat. You can use the Thief as like a stat stick to develop your agility and then become a very fast DPS or a fast healer towards the end of the game, like I already talked about. Now, if you started with a Thief and you're wondering what are your choices, well, you can pretty much become everything, because the Thief develop their MP a lot more than warriors and fighters, and they also kind of like attack physically, right? So you kind of can become anything you don't already have. So while making a decision for your Thief, think about your other party members. what are your other party members becoming, and what is the thing you need that your other party members are not already doing. If you already have a physical DPS, like a martial artist as your final destination for one of your party members, and then your other party member is going to become a sage at the end, then maybe Monster Wrangler is a good final destination for your thief. Or a second sage, if you don't mind playing two sages. So, thief is a very versatile class. You can do anything with it. Now, if you start with it, an ideal level to transition away from is level 20. You don't get any really useful skill level like 21, 22, 23. So just as soon as you're level 20, transition to the thing you want. Let's get to the last class. Now, let's talk about the Mighty Warrior. Now, the Mighty Warriors, like we talked about already, they're characterized by their very high HP. When they level up, their HP stats grows a lot. Same thing for their attack. But they're very slow. So if you started with a warrior, you have the choice to then become a thief, to then become faster, and then transition to something else. Now, this class can also be used as a final destination. Like we talked about the tanky healer becoming priest, going from priest to warrior is a viable choice. Going from thief to warrior is also a viable choice. Going from merchant to warrior is a viable choice. It also depends, it only depends on what you already have. If you didn't start with a warrior, then transitioning one of your utility class to a warrior is a good thing, or your priest. Now, if you started with a warrior, you should transition at level 21. At level 21, you learn a strong kind of like assassination skill, kind of like similar to the thief skill that allows you to like sometimes one-shot an enemy or hit their weak points. It's kind of useful for metal slimes, so a level 21 transition. Now, if you want your warrior to be your physical DPS, make him a martial artist. If you want him to become fast before becoming a martial artist, then do thief. And if you want him to have a lot of different skills and even the ability to hit twice, you can make him a Monster Wrangler if you don't already have one. So these are your choices. It depends if you want to just make him a tank or your damage dealer. Now, let's talk about the new class, the Monster Wrangler. Now, this class is new to this HD-2D remake, and it's very, very strong. So, this class can be used in two ways. That's why it's in the hybrid classes. You can use it as stepping stone because of its skill that makes you act twice in battle. You can use the skill and then transfer it to a martial artist or a sage to make a very strong DPS. That's if you started with this class. Now, if you didn't start with this class, you can transition from thief, merchant, or warrior. Basically, anyone that you want to make your one of your DPS in the late game. You have many choices. Again, it depends on what you have on your team. If you already have someone on your team that's going to transition to sage, then martial artist, then your third party member can transition to Monster Wrangler to kind of like fill the gap with all the skills that the Monster Wrangler learns. So if you start with it, martial artist, sage. If you didn't start with it, then choose your last party member to transition into a Monster Wrangler. You definitely won't regret it. This class, even if it's good as a stepping stone, is very good as a final destination because it gets stronger the more monsters you find, so it scales really hard. Now, let's talk about the easiest class to build, the Martial Artist. The Martial Artist's job is simple. Punch and destroy. They are a simple DPS. All they do is attack, attack, attack. Now, they're very simple to play. They don't really learn many spells. Actually, they learn no spells, and they don't learn that many abilities. So they're just your standard DPS. You don't want to start with them because they require a lot of XP to level up. They're just a very good final destination for the late game. Now, what is their best path? Now, we just talked about it. It's the Monster Wrangler. The Monster Wrangler gets an ability that makes him act twice when you get 50 monsters. You become Martial Artist and then punch shit in the face twice every turn and just wreck shit. Now, if you don't have a Monster Wrangler and you don't want to play it, your second option is to transition from a warrior. If you started with a warrior, it's an option to go from warrior to martial artist. That's it for this insane DPS. Now let's talk about the last class and the final class, the Sage. So we already talked about the Sage a lot in this video. You can use the Gadabout to become a Sage for free, or use an item to become Sage. Now, obviously, Sage is going to be a class that you're going to transition into. You can start with a Sage. So, we're going to talk more about the path to become a Sage and not what to do from a Sage. So, you can become Mage into Sage, Priest into Sage, or Thief into Sage, or even Merchant into Sage. Now, the class that will always become Sage is the Gadabout. Gives you a free Sage. Now, after you become Sage, should you stay Sage? Well, yes and no. You can definitely stay Sage and finish the game with it, but some people recommend to change class after you've learned all the skills, all the skills that the Sage learns. What should you become after that? Either a Thief or a Warrior to be a really tanky Sage or a very fast Sage. Your choice. But if you don't like grinding too much and you don't want to like complicate things, just stay Sage and destroy the game with it. Good luck out there. That's it for the last class. So that's it for the class changing guides. Now, this is all about optimization. If you just want to play classes you like, go for it. I'm sure with a bit of grinding, you can make anything work. This is just advice, tips for people who don't really know what to do. So just have fun out there, experiment with a bunch of skills, bunch of classes, and thank you guys for watching. Let me know in the comments if there's any strats I missed. I'll be obviously glad to hear about that, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.